Well, this is the third video discussing good country people, and hopefully we'll get to the end here. Video number 2 ended with the paragraph you can see in blue talking about the kiss that Manly planted on Hulga while they're walking to the barn. And you may remember in this little section, this kiss goes to her brain. Okay, obviously not her feelings. And the emphasis on this last section is the dichotomy between intellect and emotion. Now, remember, dichotomy is Greek for two, and is Greek for two, and dichotomy is when you have two things that are kind of opposite, but they go together. Hot and cold, sweet and sour, love and hate, intellect versus emotion. And of course, Hulga is all about intellect, and we've seen earlier how the product of her intellect is that name, which everyone considers ugly, Hulga, instead of her birth name, Joy. And remember that passage her mother read from the book, this book of the book about philosophy and science, and that passage was complete gibberish or nonsense. And her mother feels like it's an evil incantation. You may remember that quote. And O'Connor herself kind of looked at reliance on intellect as a kind of blindness that in itself is evil because it represents the desire to perfect yourself without God's input. In any case, let's continue our discussion here. I'll read this paragraph for review starting in line 395. The kiss, which had more pressure than feeling behind it, produced that extra surge of adrenaline in the girl that enables one to carry a packed trunk out of a burning house. But in her, the power went at once to the brain. Even before he released her, her mind, again, emphasis on mind, not feelings, her mind, clear and detached, and ironic anyway, was regarding him from a great distance, with amusement but with pity. She had never been kissed before, and she was pleased to discover that it was an unexceptional experience and all a matter of the mind's control. Some people might enjoy drain water if they were told it was vodka, etc., etc. Okay, so that's where we left off in discussion 2. And of course, during this walk to the barn, there's a continual discussion about God and believing in God, etc., etc. And she had already told him that she didn't believe in God, and he feigned kind of amazement at that. And he continues line 408. He says, "Then you ain't saved?" he asked, suddenly stopping. The girl smiled. It was the first time she had smiled at him at all. "In my economy," she said, "I'm saved and you are damned. But I told you I didn't believe in God." Okay, so again, O'Connor considers herself a religious writer. And just like in A Good Man's Hard to Find, in the build-up to the grandmother's eventual death in that story, there's discussion about God and Jesus, etc., that goes on for quite a bit. And a lot of critics do a lot of analysis on that discussion. And we have a similar discussion in the lead-up here to their eventual destination, the barn. Anyway, let's go to the barn and get to the point here. You can see in yellow on the screen, they get up into the loft amid the hay bales. Let's pick it up there at line 432. The two pink speckled hillsides lay back against the dark ridge of woods. The sky was cloudless and cold blue. Now, in O'Connor and so many of her stories, you get the woods and you get these weird skies. In A Good Man's Hard to Find, we had, cloudlet. The sky didn't have any clouds and it didn't have any sun, which is kind of weird. All right. And there was also mention of the dark woods. That dark woods is where danger and, dare we say, evil resides, the devil. Bad things happen there. And that sky is kind of associated with heaven, the heaven zone or something. And when you're in the presence of both woods and sky, you know you're kind of at the dichotomy between heaven and hell. In any case, let me continue here. This is line 433. The boy dropped down by her side and put one arm under her and the other over her and began methodically kissing her, making little noises like a fish. He did not remove his hat, but it was pushed far enough back not to interfere. When her glasses got in the way, he took them off and slipped them into his pocket. Now, this part about the glasses is important to remember because one of the themes in Flannery O'Connor is blindness, whether it be actual blindness, which comes up in a story or two, or kind of emotional blindness, a blindness about yourself and about your place in God's universe. And so keep in mind what just happened. He took her glasses off. In any case, let's continue. The girl at first did not return any of the kisses, but presently she began to, and after she had put several on his cheek, she reached his lips and remained there, kissing him again and again, as if she were trying to draw all the breath out of him. His breath was clear and sweet like a child's, and the kisses were sticky like a child's. He mumbled about loving her, and about knowing when he first seen her that he loved her. But the mumbling was like the sleepy fretting of a child being put to sleep by his mother. Her mind throughout this never stopped or lost itself for a second to her feelings. That's that yellow line highlighted there. Again, we see the dichotomy, and she's not going to let go of that because that's one of her main points, that joy, Hulga, herself embodies the dichotomy of mind, that would be Hulga, and joy, which would be feelings. But here at least she's still controlled by her mind, not her feelings. You ain't said you loved me none, you ain't said you loved me none, he whispered finally, pulling back from her. You got to say that. Now, when you read the story, this little passage about having to say you loved me, and he goes off on that and insists on it and repeats it over and over. It's a little weird, but I think it fits with the sense of cliche. You know, back in the day, you went on a date, you went to the loft in the barn, or you went parking in your car, etc., in some quiet place. And part of the ritual before you got down to business was to say you loved the other person. It was kind of required. It was, in a sense, a cliche, a cultural cliche. And I think that's where we're going here. As you know, this whole story is about cliches, including the title. And cliches themselves are a kind of blindness because, you don't really, they're so worn and overused. You can float on the surface and not get down into the depth of things if you rely on them, like Mrs. Hopewell, her mother, does. In any case, let's continue from there. I'll repeat his quote. You ain't said you love me none, he whispered finally, pulling back from her. You got to say that. She looked away from him off into the hollow sky. There's that weird sky again. And down at the black ridge, that's the woods again. And then down further into what appeared to be two green swelling lakes. She didn't realize he had taken her glasses, but this landscape could not seem exceptional to her, for she seldom paid any attention to her surroundings. So she's totally self-centered, self-concerned. It's a kind of blindness. She doesn't even realize what's going on around her, what her environment is like, etc. So you can see this business about the glasses, representing that blindness. And with them off, she doesn't even notice. In any case, let's continue in blue, 449. You got to say it, he repeated. You got to say you love me. She was always careful how she committed herself. In a sense, she began, if you use the word loosely, you might say that. But it's not a word I use. I don't have illusions. I'm one of those people who see through to nothing. And we've already talked about nihilism and, the whole philosophy of there is no God or God is dead. And it comes up earlier with that passage, that science passage I referenced earlier in this particular video. And that's what she thinks she wants out of this date, which is to teach him about nothing. Think of the irony there. And then let me continue. The boy was frowning. You got to say it. I said it, and you got to say it, he said. The girl looked at him almost tenderly. You poor baby, she murmured. It's just as well you don't understand. And she pulled him by the neck, face down against her. We are all damned, she said. But some of us have taken off our blindfolds and see that there's nothing to see. It's a kind of salvation. The boy's astonished eyes looked blankly through the ends of her hair. Okay, he almost whined. But do you love me or don't you? Yes, she said, and added, in a sense. But I must tell you something. There mustn't be anything dishonest between us. She lifted his head and looked him in the eye. I am 30 years old, she said. I have a number of degrees. Okay, now we got to talk about this last line about the degrees, but before that, let's look at the point that she lies about her age for the second time. We know she's 32, not 30. Previously, she told him she was 17. Why is she lying about her age? Well, it's a cliche that a woman, a little older woman, might lie about her age in order to be attractive. And that comment, plus her changing clothes and putting on the Vapex as a substitute perfume on her blouse, kind of indicates, and laying awake half the night, indicates that really what's going on with her at an emotional level is that she's nervous about going on a date and she wants to be attractive. She's never had a date. She's never been kissed. She's never had a relationship. And so that's her emotional side that she's not even in touch with. Okay, that's one thing to keep in mind. Now let's talk about this line. She confesses here. There mustn't be anything dishonest between us. So she confesses she's 30 years old. Again, that's a lie. And she confesses she has a number of degrees, as if it's something bad. It's something that has to be hidden. And now she confesses to it. And this does remind me of a movie that I saw in the past, and I don't remember all the details about the movie, but there was a male character, let's call him Bill. I don't remember his actual name in the movie. It's one of these old black and white movies from the 40s or 50s or something like that. And Bill was in high school. He hung out with the wrong people, but he was a good guy. But he was just hanging out with the wrong group of people. And they robbed a liquor store while he was in the car in the driver's seat. And he doesn't know they're in robbing the liquor store. Well, anyway, they all get in trouble. They all go to jail. And he's in jail for a couple of years or so. And then when he gets out, he moves to another town, tries to start over. He meets a girl. Let's call her Mary. Again, I don't remember her actual name. And, of course, his past is going to follow him eventually from his hometown. And he's got to tell her. He and Mary have fallen in love, but she's going to find out. So he figures it's better coming from him, but he figures it's all over, their relationship. In any case, he confesses, about what happened, and she says, oh, I don't care, Bill. I just want you to love me, something along those lines. So we see that here, and when she confesses, I have a number of degrees, and look at Manly Pointer's reaction here. This is line 463. The boy's look was irritated but dogged. I don't care, he said. I don't care a thing about what you all done. I just want to know if you love me or don't you. And he caught her to him and planted her face with kisses until she said yes, yes. Okay, so it kind of mirrors that movie, but the point here is that O'Connor wants us, the reader, to see the idea of education, of getting advanced degrees, etc., as a kind of bad thing or sin that she finally confesses to. And again, this goes back to the dichotomy business about intellect versus emotion. Now, the comment about education is going to be repeated in just a couple 2-3 little paragraphs down. So let's continue from there. So she says yes, yes, indicating she loves him. And his response is, okay, then, he said, letting her go, prove it. Now, there's another cliche. Okay, so once the girl says she loves the guy, well, he says, prove it. And we know how she would have to prove it, and that is to finally give him sex, give him what he wants. Okay, so, of course, she realizes all of that. And in the next paragraph, we get her reaction. She smiled, looking dreamily out on the shifty landscape. She had seduced him without even making up her mind to try. How, she asked, feeling he should be delayed a little bit. Okay, she knows exactly how, what that means. But remember when she had lain awake in the bed half the night, she thought she would seduce him just to teach him, and he's a Bible salesman, so he would be regretful and remorseful. And she would teach him that there's no meaning in life and he doesn't have to feel that way, and teach him about the truth. And so she thinks she was going to seduce him for that reason. Of course, she had never had relations with a guy. And I think that intellectual excuse is not what's really going on with her, but she's not even in touch with those emotions. In any case, she doesn't get the response to the how question here. Let's look at 469. He leaned over and put his lips to her ear. Show me where your wooden leg joins on, he whispered. Now, from here on out, the language gets, at times, very sexual in nature. The vocabulary, the phrasing. And I think that's intentional, and we'll talk in a little bit why that might be the case. So take a look at the next line, 471. The girl uttered a sharp little cry. I mean, okay, look at that language. And you can imagine a more direct sexual connotation to that language there. The girl uttered a sharp little cry, and her face instantly drained of color. The obscenity of this suggestion was not what shocked her. As a child, she had sometimes been subject to feelings of shame, but education had removed the last traces of that, as a good surgeon scrapes for cancer. So she had feelings when she was joy, in this case feelings of shame, but education had removed those feelings. So again, the dichotomy, intellect versus emotion. Let's continue. But she would no more have felt it, that is, shame, over what he was asking, than she would have believed in his Bible. But she was as sensitive about the artificial egg as a peacock about his tail. Now, again, Flannery O'Connor is associated with peacocks. Her pictures on a couple of postage stamps have peacocks in them, or peacock feathers. Her most famous portrait has a peacock in it, and peacocks appear in many, many of her stories. That those beautiful feathers on the peacock, on one level, represents a kind of paradise. And just as in Good Man It's Hard to Find, we have those beautiful, colorful parrots on Bailey's shirt, which ends up on the Misfit, and those parrots are kind of substitute birds of paradise from Southeast Asia, which are also a very colorful bird in the deep, dark rainforest. And so when the grandmother in that story touches the shirt on the Misfit, she's touching paradise. And so when he kills her, she has that pathway to heaven. I mean, that's one possible interpretation of all of that. But that's how Flannery O'Connor's minds work. We have all these symbols and things going on. Anyway, let me skip that now. Let's just get to the end of the story. No one ever touched it, meaning her leg, but her. She took care of it as someone else would his soul, in private, and almost with her own eyes turned away. No, she said. Now, that leg is Hulga's soul. It's a wooden leg. Hers is a wooden soul. Think about that for a minute. In any case, he continues. 478. I known it, he muttered, sitting up. You're just playing me for a sucker. Oh, no, no, she cried. It joins at the knee, only at the knee. Why do you want to see it? The boy gave her a long, penetrating look. Because, he said, it's what makes you different. You ain't like anybody else. Wow. And of course, for Hulga, that wooden leg is her defining self. She stomps around the house in it as exclamation marks to her existence as Hulga, not as Joy. And we could go into that more, but let's keep going. She's really affected by this. 483. She sat staring at him. There was nothing about her face or round, freezing blue eyes that to indicate this had moved her. but she felt as if her heart had stopped and left her mind to pump her blood. So there's the dichotomy again. So now, okay, the power leaves the mind, the intellect, logic, and reason, and it goes to her feelings, kind of indicated by the word blood, pump her blood. She decided for the first time in her life she was face to face with real innocence. Of course, she's totally wrong, because she's totally wrong about everything. This boy, with an instinct that came from beyond wisdom, had touched the truth about her. When after a minute she said in a hoarse, high voice, now there's some of that vocabulary again, very sexual in nature. She said in a I'm trying to highlight it, I can't do it. There we go. She said in a hoarse, high voice, all right. It was like surrendering to him completely. It was like losing her own life and finding it again, miraculously, in his. Yeah, now that if that's, you can see how intimate and sexual that language is. And obviously O'Connor's doing this for a purpose. Let's continue. Very gently he began to roll the slack leg up. The artificial limb in a white sock and brown flat shoe was bound in a heavy material like canvas and ended in an ugly jointure where it was attached to the stump. The boy's face and his voice were entirely reverent as he uncovered it and said, now show me how to take it off and on. She took it off for him and put it back on again, and then he took it off himself, handling it as tenderly as if it were a real one. See, he said with a delighted child's face, now I can do it myself. Put it back on, she said. She was thinking that she would run away with him and that every night he would take the leg off and every morning put it back on. Put it back on, she said. Okay, so you can see the sexual nature of this scene, even though no actual sex is occurring. But in a way, it shows the deep, intimate nature of her feelings that she's not been in touch with ever. And so that when he takes that leg and won't give it back, it's a kind of sexual assault. It's a kind of rape. And kind of indicates the violence of his act. And O'Connor's all about violence. Her characters, her main characters, like the grandmother who's killed by the misfit, encounter that violence so she can shock them. And in a way, in this way, these characters like the misfit and Manly Pointer provide a pathway to salvation, to grace, and ultimately perhaps heaven, as we see with the grandmother at the end of The Good Man's Hard to Find. So this is a violent act that he commits just by taking the leg. In any case, let's continue there. So she says, let me find it again. Okay, yeah, so she tells him to put it back on. This is 498. And then he answers, not yet, he murmured, setting it on its foot and out of her reach. Leave it off for a while. You got me instead. So now she doesn't have a leg to stand on. And without that wooden sole, that wooden leg, all she's got is her feelings, which she's not familiar with, because she's not in touch with those feelings. And look at the vocabulary in the next sentence. She gave a little cry of alarm, but he pushed her down and began to kiss her again. Without the leg, she felt entirely dependent on him. Her brain, here's the dichotomy again, seemed to have stopped thinking altogether and to be about some other function that it was not very good at. Different expressions raced back and forth over her face. Every now and then the boy, his eyes like two steel spikes, would glance behind him where the leg stood. Finally, she pushed him off and said, put it back on now. And he says, wait, we'll get into what comes next. But I just want to mention very briefly these two steel spikes. There are references to that kind of thing in many of her stories. And of course, there's always the religious kind of undertone of symbolism. And, Jesus on the cross, nailed to the cross with metal spikes of some kind, etc. One of her characters in one of her stories blinds himself with spikes. But I don't want to go into that now. But I'm just saying is that, there's always this undercurrent of symbols that form a complex kind of web to help backstop her religious views, at least the views she thinks she may be giving to her readers. Now, whether she actually succeeds in that's a whole nother story. And we're not going to go into that in this video. Let's continue now, because now we get to the Hollow Bible. And with all of the with all of the implications of that, Flannery O'Connor was a Roman Catholic in the Protestant South, and she felt that there was a lot of hypocrisy in that. The Protestants in the southern states, very strongly, are against, drinking, gambling, sex, etc. And I could tell you stories having grown up in Texas about that, but we'll skip that for now. In a lot of ways, it's like Hawthorne. Like A Good Man's Hard to Find was a real backhanded, well, not even backhanded, it was a direct insult to the Puritans. As you know, his family was engaged in the Salem witch trials. At that time, one of his ancestors, Hathorne, was one of the investigators, one of the most rabid investigators, and they were ashamed of these ancestors, so they added a W and changed their name to Hawthorne instead of Hathorne. And here, O'Connor is kind of continuing that idea in using this Hollow Bible stuff to criticize the prevailing religious ethos in Georgia, where she had to return with her lupus from New York. As we discussed previously, of course, she wrote herself into the character of Holga in a variety of ways, but that's another video. So here you have the whiskey inside the Hollow Bible. You have a pack of cards representing gambling. And of course, you have sex with those condoms that are also in that Hollow Bible. And another little additional spicy detail, you have pornographic images on the playing cards. Let's read it. It was hollow, and this is line 510, and contained a pocket flask of whiskey, a pack of cards, and a small blue box with printing on it. He laid these out in front of her, one at a time, in an evenly spaced row, like one presenting offerings at the shrine of a goddess. He put the blue box in his hand. This product to be used only for the prevention of disease, she read, and dropped it. The boy was unscrewing the top of the flask. He stopped and pointed with a smile to the deck of cards. It was not an ordinary deck, but one with an obscene picture on the back of each card. Back in the day, it's not like today where pornography is everywhere. Our whole culture is X-rated, from music to music videos to the internet in so many different ways, and everywhere. Let's not go into that. That would be another rant for about 20 minutes. But back then, it was all in the closet, so to speak. My uncle kept a big stack of Playboy magazines hidden in his basement closet to be used on poker night with the boys. And I discovered that by accident, much to my amazement, when I was very young. And so, putting pornographic pictures on cards was one way of men being able to look at this stuff. So anyway, all these sins are in that Bible. So you can see the symbolic implications, the hypocrisy of the prevailing religious groups there in Georgia. So let's continue. Of course, this shocks her, and suddenly she realizes everything she thought about Manly Pointer is wrong. And she says in line 518, "Aren't you," she murmured, "aren't you just good country people?" In the end, she's no different than her mother. She relies on the cliches to understand the world, and of course, it's a kind of blindness. So let's continue. The boy cocked his head. He looked as if he were just beginning to understand that she might be trying to insult him. "Yeah," he said, curling his lips slightly, but it ain't held me back none. I'm as good as you any day of the week. Oh, that's great. Excuse me, I better drink some water. Excuse me. Anyway, you can see that that's fun stuff. Give me my leg, she said. He pushed it farther away with his foot. Come on now, let's begin to have us a good time, he said coaxingly. We ain't got to know one another good yet. Give me my leg, she screamed. Okay, and so he answers, what's the matter with you all of a sudden now? Look at the in yellow. Just a while ago, you said you didn't believe in nothing. I thought you was some girl. Her face was almost purple. You're a Christian, she hissed, a fine Christian. Now there's that word hissed, of course associated with snakes, snakes associated with Satan. So, when he snuck into the garden and seduced Eve using reason and logic, according to Milton's Paradise Lost. And yes, that's exactly the way Hawthorne saw it. And O'Connor, who views herself as a artistic child of Hawthorne, was right in line with that. But the word hiss appears in so many of her stories, associated with the main character that needs correcting in some sense, with the grammar in A Good Man's Hard to Find, which we read. In any case, you can see you can see her reaction. You're a Christian, she hissed. You're a fine Christian. You're just like all of them. Say one thing and do another. You're a perfect Christian. The boy's mouth was set angrily. I hope you don't think, he said in a lofty, indignant tone, that I believe in that crap. I may sell Bibles, but now 3 cliches out of his mouth in a row. He's just as blind as the others. Now, you got to remember, these Jesus characters, as many critics refer to them, or agents of grace, that doesn't mean they're like Jesus. It just means they're in their function, they provide that pathway. They're more like lightning bolts from the Old Testament God, fire and brimstone. But they themselves, the misfit in A Good Man's Hard to Find, is a killer. He's bad, okay? And Manly Pointer, this pervert who steals eyes, artificial eyes and legs, and probably other body parts, is bad. He's not good. And he's just as blind as everybody else in this story. So he says here, I may sell, this is line 533, I may sell Bibles, but I know which end is up. There's number 1 cliche. I wasn't born yesterday. There's number 2. And I know where I'm going. Okay. So, in any case, all right, we can cut to the end here. He makes off with the Bibles. And we end up with Mrs. Hopewell and Mrs. Freeman. Again, the names, like Manly Pointer pointing out the path to grace, plus the obvious sexual connotations. And like in all of these stories that she has, names mean something. We can kind of work some symbol through them. We have Mrs. Hopewell, who's hopelessly drowning in cliches, but we also have Mrs. Freeman, who recognizes the truth about Holgo, and we see that in a previous scene. So Mrs. Freeman is not so blinded. In any case, they're digging up onions, okay, out in the field, and they see Manly Pointer in the distance. I'll pick it up line 549. They saw him emerge a little later from the woods and head across the meadow toward the highway. Why, that looks like that nice dull young man that tried to sell me a Bible yesterday, Mrs. Hopewell said, squinting. He must have been selling them to the Negroes back in there. He was so simple, she said. But I guess the world would be better off if we were all that simple. And again, she's blind. She doesn't recognize him at all for what he's really like and what he's really about. But Mrs. Freeman does, and we see that in the following line. Mrs. Freeman's gaze drove forward and just touched him before he disappeared under the hill. Now that's a weird way of talking about that. She saw him and he was, kind of was going along and went out of sight. Disappeared under the hill. Obviously, the possible symbolic references to going to hell, down to hell again. Then, this is line 555, she returned her attention to the evil-smelling onion shoot she was lifting from the ground. Some can't be that simple, she said. I know I never could. Okay, so there's the story. Holga's left in the barn. Now, she'll be able, she's not going to die like the grandma. She can crawl or hop back or do something to get back to the house. But the question is, without the leg, that wooden soul, can she become joy again? Can she embrace those feelings? And ultimately, O'Connor would like her to embrace the universe with a God in it, not a nihilistic universe where there is no God. And that's the story. Good luck with your essay. Let me see if I can end this thing. I gotta find the right. Okay, I think I'm getting there. Yes. Signing off now.